U.S. is harming themselves with these tariffs. Okay?
President Trump is once again vowing new tariffs, this time saying he'll double tariffs on imported steel from 25 to 50%. The president says they'll kick into
Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent announcement in Hamilton marks a pivotal and long-awaited moment for Canada's beleaguered, struggling, and increasingly threatened steel industry. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The federal government, under Carney's decisive leadership, is initiating a series of decisive, aggressive, and highly tactical new steps to shield domestic steel producers who have been relentlessly pummeled by the ongoing trade disputes with the United States and the relentless, predatory influx of cheap, subsidized foreign steel. Carney's comprehensive and multifaceted plan, which he promised to fully implement before the end of the month, is a direct, robust, and forceful response to the pervasive and economically damaging practice of dumping. This is an economic term of art used to describe a scenario where foreign companies deliberately sell their steel in the Canadian market at artificially low, often below-cost, prices, effectively subsidizing their exports at the expense of Canadian jobs, livelihoods, and long-term economic stability. This practice makes it nearly impossible for Canadian producers, who operate with higher labor standards, stricter environmental regulations, and consequently higher operational costs, to compete on an equal footing, threatening the very existence and long-term viability of domestic steelmaking, a cornerstone of Canada's industrial identity. The industry has been sounding the alarm for months, with multiple companies already forced to institute widespread and painful layoffs and significantly scale back their production levels as a direct result of the U.S. government's steep and escalating import taxes. The Prime Minister's public commitment to swift and decisive action, delivered on the ground in a key steel-producing city, elicited a profound sense of relief and guarded optimism from an industry that has been waiting for a strong, unambiguous federal response that goes beyond mere rhetoric. The new measures are a dramatic expansion and significant tightening of earlier, less effective changes that were initially introduced in June. The updated regulations are far more stringent, far-reaching, and are designed to target a broader array of countries and trade practices with surgical precision, leaving few, if any, avenues for foreign exporters to exploit. For those nations that do not have a free trade agreement with Canada, such as industrial giants like China and Turkey, the tariff rate quota, TRQ, will be precipitously slashed to a mere half of its 2024 volume. This is not a subtle adjustment, but a drastic, unyielding reduction in the amount of steel that can enter the country duty-free, effectively cutting off a major supply line for cheap imports. Any and all imports from these nations that manage to exceed this new, significantly lower limit will be hit with a prohibitively high 50% tariff. This is a massive, unprecedented, and frankly punitive increase from the government's previous, more lenient policies, sending an unambiguous and unmistakable signal to foreign exporters that the Canadian market is no longer a dumping ground for their excess capacity. The new quota structure is meticulously designed to give Canadian steel producers a clear competitive advantage and a larger, more protected, and more secure share of their own backyard, fostering domestic growth and investment. Crucially, the new crackdown extends even to countries that do have a free trade agreement with Canada, with the notable exceptions of the U.S. and Mexico. Imports from these partners that surpass their respective 2024 volumes will also be subject to an equally punishing 50% tariff. This demonstrates the Canadian government's unwavering and resolute commitment to protecting its domestic market from all angles and all sources, regardless of existing trade agreements. It is a bold, all-encompassing move that closes a critical loophole that could have been exploited by foreign nations seeking new markets for their excess steel, a move that shows a deep understanding of global trade dynamics. In a brilliant, innovative, and highly specific move to counter a common and frustrating circumvention tactic, Carney also announced a new and specific 25% tariff on imports from all non-U.S. countries that contain any steel that was originally melted and poured in China. This is a direct, tactical, and targeted response to the widespread concern that Chinese steel is being rerouted through other countries to bypass Canadian tariffs and unfairly enter the market, a practice that has been a long-standing source of frustration and economic damage for the domestic industry. This measure demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the complex and often deceptive nature of global supply chains and a determination to close every possible avenue for unfair competition. Carney provided compelling and sobering statistics to underscore the severity of the problem, noting that imports currently supply an astonishing nearly two-thirds of all steel consumed within Canada's borders. This is a stark, deeply troubling, and economically unsustainable contrast to the U.S., where imports account for less than a third of consumption, and the European Union, where the figure is less than a sixth. The new measures are explicitly intended to create a fairer, more level playing field and to provide Canadian steel producers with a much-needed and much-deserved larger share of their own domestic market. It is a fundamental and long-overdue shift in economic philosophy, prioritizing domestic industry and national economic security over unfettered free trade. It is important to note that the existing trade arrangements with the U.S. and Mexico under the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, will remain untouched, signaling a deliberate and strategic desire not to further complicate or inflame relations with North American partners while simultaneously addressing the wider global threat. No changes were announced regarding the counter-tariffs that the U.S. has imposed, and the government's strategy for addressing the particular, highly sensitive issue remains clouded in uncertainty and ongoing diplomatic maneuvering, leaving the industry in a state of cautious suspense. The announcement was met with a palpable and collective sigh of relief from industry leaders who have been holding their breath and bracing for the worst for months. Catherine Cobden, President and CEO of the influential Canadian Steel Producers Association, said the new quotas are a monumental improvement and will be instrumental in helping the industry recapture domestic market. She described the new measures as a much better place than where we were yesterday, highlighting the previous inaction and the urgent, existential nature of the situation. While she candidly acknowledged that the measures may not be powerful enough to fully offset the devastating losses from the U.S. tariffs, she was unequivocally optimistic that they would provide crucial and immediate support, helping to stop the bleeding, stabilize the sector, and provide a foundation for future growth. Michael Garcia, the CEO of Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, also enthusiastically welcomed the changes, calling them a very significant step forward that would finally begin to close the wide-open loopholes that have allowed cheap, dumped foreign steel to flood the market for far too long, undermining Canadian jobs, investment, and long-term industrial capacity. The industry remains on edge, anxiously waiting to see the full and final impact of the 50% U.S. tariffs and holding out hope for a favorable resolution in the ongoing trade negotiations with the U.S., which had a pressing and now passed August 1st deadline. Carney himself had previously tempered expectations, hinting that Canadians might have to accept a certain level of tariffs from the U.S., and the government has not yet detailed how it will respond to the ongoing American tariffs after the deadline. This lingering uncertainty adds another layer of complexity to the challenges facing the steel sector. Conservative MP Shelby Cramp-Newman, the party's Canada-U.S. trade critic, also called the decision a step in the right direction, indicating a significant degree of cross-party support for the government's protectionist measures, underscoring the broad political consensus on the national importance of protecting the steel industry. The measures represent a significant, substantial, and long overdue intervention by the Canadian government to safeguard a vital domestic industry from the combined pressures of global trade imbalances and a challenging North American trade relationship, demonstrating a renewed commitment to industrial policy.